I'm Raymond Douglas, and welcome to my man cave. Well, rather toolshed, or my special place of reflection. The Inside Out Perspective takes a look at life's challenges and its effects and asks one simple question: what race are you running? Welcome to another episode of the Inside Out Perspective, and a big shout out today to Dr. Dan Brubaker, who has finally in the last 2 days launched his own YouTube channel. Excellent, because up until now we've been hearing all the information he's been bringing to the front about these variants in the Quran and the changes to the manuscripts via Jay Smith. And now we have direct access to his research and what he's bringing to the front. And it's beautiful, because if you followed Jay's channel, yesterday's post, he did a great explanation of showing that it's not the Karat and the Aruf which is the important thing, but on this side, as he explains, it's the actual changes and the variants in the actual words, and this is what Dan Brubaker is starting to dig into, and it's fantastic. So if you like my channel, please subscribe, follow, and do whatever you like to do. But in this first video clip of Dr. Dan Brubaker, he pointed out, he was looking at the Sana manuscript, which is considered the oldest manuscript in the Islamic tradition, and he was looking at just one page, and he brought up 3 variants just on that one page. Now the first one was a marking, which is clearly, from his perspective, a scribal thing which happens in these type of documents. So there's no great yahoo about that. The second one he had a look at was the addition of Allah into the verse. And we're looking at Surah 9 here. And again, it's just a question which is raised because in the context of that specific passage, there is no reason to add the word Allah. From the context, you can clearly see that the passage is already talking about the Islamic God Allah. So it's a bit confusing why they want to go and change this. But it's the third one which is extremely interesting.
Now, let's take another look before we finish up here at the verse itself and read it there. It says, "It is the same whether or not you beg forgiveness for them. Though you ask forgiveness for them 70 times, Allah will not forgive them. That is because they disbelieved in Allah and in His messenger." That last little bit is cut off, but that's what it says. So this verse can be read sensibly, grammatically correct, with or without the Sab'in Maraton Fa. If you read it without it, it would say, "It is the same whether or not you beg forgiveness for them. Though you ask forgiveness for them, Allah will not forgive them." So that makes sense, but it also makes sense, of course, the way that it stands today.
And remember, the basis of this whole dilemma which is going on within the Islamic circles and with the scholars is that the Quran confirms that the Quran is the word of Allah. It is perfectly preserved. It is held in heaven on tablets, and there are no changes in the manuscript. And that is the foundation of Islam. And remember that Islam requires the Quran as their foundation of the faith. If you took the Quran away, there is no Islam. Now, Christians do not have that problem. You can take the New Testament away, because the New Testament is based on the historical evidence of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We know that the writing of the New Testament came after Jesus' death and resurrection, not before or not during. It's not a book given by Yahweh to Jesus. This is the eyewitness account of what happened during Jesus' ministry. And it's key to remember that it's the eyewitnesses which write the Gospels and write the New Testament. From an Islamic point of view, the foundation is the Quran. And the foundation is based on those 4 premises which are clearly defined in the Quran, of that it's perfectly preserved, it is from Allah, there are no changes, and no one can change Allah's word, and they're held up in heaven. So when we have a look And Muslim apologists love to go to 1 John 5 verse 7 and 8, where a scribe changed the words of spirit, water and blood, in the understanding that spirit, water and blood is a direct reference to the Trinity, or the understanding of tradition of the writing of the biblical narrative. Water is always a reference to the Holy Spirit. The blood is Jesus, and the Spirit is Yahweh. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. Now, the Quranic dilemma is that they don't have the vault full of manuscripts. They basically rely on 6. And when they look at those 6, it's not even a complete Quran. And if you go onto the Quran web pages, you see that they have to go and dig around and find 63 different manuscripts to try and make up a complete Quran. So they don't even have a complete Quran in their possession. So when we come to something like this, in the Sunnah manuscript, which is considered the oldest and the best preserved manuscript to date, or found to date, and we see that a scribe has changed the actual manuscript, it creates a huge dilemma. Because again, if we have a look at that verse, there's no reason to change or add 7 times into it. So it's a manipulation of the text, and the manipulation of the text is purely based on the fact that it needs to match the 1924 Hafs edition of the Quran. The second thing which we need to be addressed before we go and have a look at this edition is that if you have a look at the two faiths of Christianity in the first 300 years of its growth and Islam in its 300 years of growth, you have the Christians under severe persecution who died for just claiming to be followers of Christ, let alone holding a manuscript or a letter from Paul. And those letters and manuscripts were time and time again collected by the Romans and burnt. Yet, under that extreme persecution, we have material dating from the 1st century of the death of Jesus Christ, confirming the traditions of the early church fathers of what they preached. So we got that security that despite the extreme persecution, that the texts are correct. And if we do find a problem, there's a vast amount to go and check it. On the Islamic side, we don't have that persecution. We have a controlled development and distribution of the text. In other words, you can relate it to the government printing press. They decided on the standard of Uthman and they printed copies and they handed them out. Yet, there is no evidence of those Qurans from the 7th or 8th century. The best we get to is something like the Sunnah manuscript. So, even if we accept that this is a Uthman manuscript and it's perfectly preserved and whatever the Islam apologists want to claim, let's have a look at this. Because here clearly, after the fact, after it was written, a person has gone and added the word 7 times into it. And why? And as Dan Brubaker pointed out, this is a clear reference to Peter in Matthew, when he was asking Jesus, how many times must I ask for forgiveness? 7 times? And Jesus replied, no, 70 times 7. And let's have a look at this passage. We're looking here at forgiveness and the word 70 times added in it. Why that correlation? And the truth of the matter is, when Islam was developed or was developing, they needed to find body for this text which they had, which really wasn't formulated at the time. So they started borrowing, and you can see in numerous places where these borrowings happen. They come from biblical narratives, they come from Jewish traditions, they come from Gnostic traditions, they come from other scholars' writings. For example, the embryonic development all comes from Galen. 200 years before that, not from the divine God of Islam. They borrowed text. So here we have another example of a text being inserted to give substance to the Islamic faith. And there's no reason to it but to show that the Quran was never ever developed in the 7th century as Islam claims. Remember, the divine word of the Quran according to Shabir Ali is 19. That proves the Quran is from Allah. So why borrow 7, the biblical narrative's holy number? What's the point? And while this insertion happens into the Quran, we need to question, because since it's been added into it, clearly the Quran, when it says it's been perfectly preserved, it isn't perfectly preserved because there's a change. So the preservation doesn't happen, proving that Allah is not a divine creature. Secondly, if the Quran is saying that no one can change his words, how come Allah hasn't protected his Quran yet? Because clearly a scribe, someone, has gone and changed it and put in another word. And how can changes and additions happen on an earthly copy? Because it's changing what apparently is in heaven, or paradise, or Yana, as the Arabic word is. And then thirdly and finally, which is the nail in the coffin, that clearly if a scribe is adding a word into the Holy Quran, it can't be from Allah, it's from a scribe. So in the 4 principles of the faith, where the Quran is from Allah, is perfectly preserved, it's held on tablets, and no one can change it, all 4 of those tenets of, or the base, the foundation of the Islamic faith is destroyed just by one change. And the scary thing is, and this is the first episode of Dr. Dan Brubaker's eulogy, or whatever you're going to call it, I'm not too sure. He claims there are over 4,000 additions like this and changes like this in the Quran. And he's only addressed 3. That's 3,997 still to come. And in the words of J. Smith, come home to Papa, come to Papa, Jesus is waiting for you. Muslims, it's time that you started interacting with the evidence and started looking at the truth. Because the question still remains, what race are you running?